Greetings, gratitude, and highest heart love. Thank you for being here. This is the final chapter and last reading of The Ways of White Folks by Langston Hughes. I'm your moderator and narrator, Uriel Neveu Riley. So much love and appreciation. So, here we go. This is chapter 14. It's called Father and Son. This is the longest of the stories in this book. So let's go. Chapter 14, The Ways of White Folks. Father and Son. Colonel Thomas Norwood stood in his doorway at the big house looking down the dusty plantation road. Today his youngest son was coming home. A heavy Georgia spring filled the morning air with sunshine and earth perfumes. It made the old man feel strangely young again. Bert was coming home. 20 years ago he had begotten him. This boy, however, was not his real son. For Colonel Thomas Norwood had no real son, no white and legal heir to carry on the Norwood name. This boy was a son by his Negro mistress, Coralie Lewis, who kept his house and had borne him all his children. Colonel Norwood never would have admitted, even to himself, that he was standing in his doorway waiting for his half-Negro son to come home. But in truth, that is what he was doing. He was curious about the boy. How would he look after all these years away at school? 6 or 7, surely, for not once in that long time had he been allowed to come back to the big house plantation. The colonel had said then that never did he want to see the boy again. But in truth he did. For this boy had been, after all, the most beautiful of the lot, the brightest and the baddest of the colonel's 5 children, lording it over the other children, and sassing not only his colored mother, but his white father as well, handsome and mischievous, favoring too much the colonel in looks and ways. This boy, Bert, at 14, had got himself sent off to school to stay, now a student in college, or what they call a college in Negro terms in Georgia. He was coming home for the summer vacation. Today's brother, Willie, had been sent to the station to meet him in the new Ford. The 10 o'clock train must have reached the junction by now, thought the colonel, standing in the door. Soon the Ford would be shooting back down the road in a cloud of dust, curving past the tall white pillars of the front porch and around to the kitchen stoop where Cora would greet her child. Thinking thus, Colonel Norwood came inside the house, closed the screen, and pulled at a bell cord hanging from the wall of the great dark living room with its dignified but shabby horsehair furniture of the 90s. And by, an old Negro servant whose name was Sam, and who wore a kind of old-fashioned butler's coat, came and brought the colonel a drink. "I'm going in the library where I don't want to be disturbed." "Yes, sir," said the Negro servant. "You hear me?" "Yes, sir," said the servant, knowing that when Colonel Norwood said library, he meant he did not want to be disturbed. The colonel entered the small room where he kept his books and papers of both a literary and a business nature. He closed the door. He did this deliberately intending to let all the Negroes in the house know that he had no interest in whatsoever in the homecoming about to take place. He intended to remain in his library for several hours after Bert's arrival. Yet, as he bent over his desk peering at accounts his storekeeper had brought him, his head kept turning toward the window that gave on the yard and the road, kept looking to see if it was a car were coming down in a cloud of dust. An hour or so later, when shouts of welcome, loud, warm Negro cries, laughter, and the blowing of an auto horn filled with Georgia's sunlight outside, the colonel bent more closely over his ledgers. But he did turn his eyes a little to catch the dust sifting in the sunny air above the road where the car had passed. And his mind went back to that little olive colored kid he had beaten one day in the stables years ago. The kid grown up now and just come home. He had always been a little ashamed of that particular beating he had given the boy, but his temper had got the best of him. That child, Bert, looking almost like a white child, a hell of a lot favoring the colonel, had come running out to the stables one afternoon when he was showing his horses to some guests in town. The boy had come up to him crying, "Papa!" He knew better right in front of company. "Papa, Ma says she's got dinner ready." The colonel had knocked him down under his feet of the horses right there in front of the guests, and afterwards he had locked him in the stable and beaten him severely. The boy had to learn not to call him Papa, and certainly not in front of white people from town. But it had been hard to teach Bert anything. The colonel ruminated. Trouble was, the boy was too smart. There were other unpleasant memories of the same saucy ivory skinned younger playing about the front yard, even running through the big house, in spite of the orders that Coralie's children and all the other pickaninnies keep to the back of the house or down in the quarters. But as a child, Bert had never learned his place. Peace. Hi. Hi, it's heart love. Thank you so much. Peace, Aura. Gratitude for reading with us. The Ways of White Folks by Langston Hughes. We're at page 210 down at the bottom. He's too damn much like me, the colonel thought. Quick as hell. Core's been telling me he's leading his class at the Institute and a football captain. So they waste their time playing football at these darky colleges. Well, anyway, he must be a smart darky. Got my blood in him. The colonel had Sam bring some food into the library. He pretended to be extremely busy and not to give the old Negro bursting with news a chance to speak. The colonel acted as though he was unaware of the presence of the newly arrived boy on the plantation, or if he were aware, completely uninterested and completely occupied. But in the late afternoon, the colonel got up from his desk, went out into the parlor, picked up an old straw hat, and strolled through the front door, across the wide porch with its white pillars, and down the road toward the south field. The colonel saw the brown backs of his Negroes in the green cotton. He smelt the earth scent of a day that had been long and hot. He turned off by the edge of a field, went down to the creek and back towards the house, along a path that took him through a grove of pecan trees, skirting the old slave quarters to the back door of the big house. Long before he approached the big house, he could hear Negroes' voices, musical and laughing. Then he could see a small group of dark bare arms and faces about the kitchen stoop. Cora was sitting on a stool in the yard, probably washing fruit for jelly. Livonia, the fat old cook, was on the porch shelling peas for dinner, seated on the stoop and on the ground, and standing around, where colored persons the colonel knew had no good reason to be there at that time of day. Some of them, when they saw the colonel coming, began to move away, back towards the barns, or whatever work they were doing. He was aware, too, standing in the midst of this group, a tall young man in sporty white trousers, black and white Oxfords, and a blue shirt. He looked very clean and well dressed, like a white man. The colonel took this to be his son, and a certain vibration shook him from head to foot. Across the wide, dusty yard, their eyes met. The colonel's brows came together. His shoulders lifted and went back as though they were faced by an indignity just suffered. His chin went up, and he began to think on his way toward them how he would walk through this group like a white man. The Negroes, of course, would be respectful and afraid, as usual, and he would say merely, "Good evening, Bert," to this boy, his son. Then wait a moment, perhaps, and see what the boy said before passing on into the house. Laughter died and dripped and trickled away, and talk quieted, and silence fell degree by degree of stiffness like steel nearing each step the white man approached. A strange sort of stiffness like steel nearing steel grew and straightened between the colored boy in the black and white shoes and the old colonel who had just come from looking at his fields and his Negroes working. "Good evening, Bert," the colonel said. "Good evening, Colonel Tom," the boy replied, quickly, politely, and almost eagerly. And then, like a puppet pulled by some perverse string, the boy offered his hand. The colonel looked at the strong young near, white-handed, held out toward him, and made no effort to take it. His eyes lifted to the eyes of the boy, his son, in front of him. The boy's eyes did not fall, but a slow flush reddened the olive of his skin as the old man turned without a word toward the stoop and into the house. The boy's hand went to his side again. A hum of dark voices broke the silence. This happened between father and son. The mother, sitting there washing plums in a pail, did not understand what had happened, but the water from which she took the plums felt cool to her hands that were suddenly burning hot. Part 2. Thank you for being here and reading with us. Peace, guys. We're down at the bottom of 213. Cora Lee Lewis, sitting, washing plums, had been Colonel Norwood's mistress for 30 years. She had lived in the big house, supervised his life, given him children, and loved him. In his turn, he felt something very like love for her. Now in his 60s, without Cora, he would have been lost. But of course, he did not realize that consciously. The history of their liaison, like that of so many between Negro women and the white men in the South, began without love, at least on his part. For a long while, its motif was lust, whose sweeter name, perhaps, is passion. The colonel had really known Cora all her life. As a grown boy, as a half grown boy, he had teased her as a baby, pulling her kinky braids and laughing at the way she rolled in the dust with the other Pekingese, born to the black servants and sharecroppers on his father's plantation. He had seen her as a girl, barefooted and shy, brown face shining, bringing milk to the big house night and morning, for her father took care of the cows. Her mother worked sometimes in the house, but mostly in the fields, and Cora knew early how to pick cotton too. Then there came years when young Norwood had no contact with Cora. Years when he had been away at military school. Those first few years when he had come back from Macon with his new bride. Those years of love and worry with the delicate and lovely woman he had wedded. During his early married life, the colonel could not truthfully remember ever having laid eyes on Cora, although she was about the place surely. But Cora remembered often seeing the colonel, young and handsome, tall and straight. He drove over the plantation roads with the wisp, a pretty little lady he had married. She remembered him particularly well that the day of his father's funeral. When he came back from the burial, he and his wife, master and mistress of the big house now. How sad and worried young Colonel Norwood looked that day, descending from the carriage. And as the months went by, he began to look more and more worried and weary. Servants gossiped from the big house, drifting down to the humbler Negroes in the cabin, said that a wall had grown up between the young colonel and his little wife, who seemed to be wasting away day by day, a wall like a mist. Mm. And the Negroes began to laugh that they were never no children born to Mr. and Mrs. Then gossip began to say that the young colonel had taken up with the cook's daughter, black but comely Livonia, who worked in the pantry. Then the quarters laughed all the more when Livonia had 4 of 5 Negro lovers, too. And she wasn't faithful to anybody, just liked to love. Cora heard all this, and in her mind a certain envy sprang up. Livonia, huh? Cora began to look more carefully into the cracked mirror in her mother's cabin. She combed her hair and oiled it better than before. She was 17 then. Time you've taken some pride about yourself, said her mother, noting the change. Yes'm, said Cora, and when she took Milk to the big house now, she tried to look her best. One night there was a party there. A great many people came from the junction, and even 70 miles off from in town, by horse and by carriage, by train, and even some by that newfangled auto buggy that most of the plantation hands had never seen before. The Negroes were all excited at having so many white folks around. It was the missus' birthday. There were great doings at the big house plantation. The first evening, the party went on until late in the night. Some people left at dawn. Others slept a while and left in the afternoon. Some were house guests. And on the second night, there was a party again. But that night, everyone was pretty tired and got pretty drunk, too, mostly. The colonel was very gay and very drunk, but his little wife cried and went to bed. She was mighty touchy, all the Negroes knew, always pouting and spatting and acting funny with the colonel. Wonder why? Wonder why. There was a party in the quarters among the Negroes, too. That second night, Livonia was there, dancing fit to kill, and the music was wild. In the heat of the night, Cora went out of the barn where the party was, out into the moonlight, and looked up at the lights of the big house on the rise. She stretched and breathed in the warm night air and walked through the trees toward the road that ran to town. She made a big circle about the big house, wondering a little what was going on there. When she got to the road, she sat down under a huge live oak tree. She could hear the laughter and clapping of the Negroes down on the edge of the cotton fields. But in the big house, where it should have been gay too, it was mighty quiet. Sometimes a loud or quarrelsome voice could be heard. Probably the men were gambling, and the ladies gone to bed. The trees cast great shadows across the road in the warm light of the moon. Cora stretched and breathed deeply again and got up on to go when she saw very near her a figure walking in the slivery dust, a tall, thin, young white man walking in the cotton. Suddenly, he called her. "Who are you?" It was young Norwood speaking. "I's Cora Lee Lewis, Aunt Toby's Lewis daughter." The white man came up to her, took her brown face in his hands, and lifted it at the moon. "You're out mighty late," he said. Cora's body trembled, her mouth opened. In the shadow of the live oak tree, there by the road, 30 years ago, in a night of moon. Part 3. When the first child, Willie, was in her, she told her mother all about it. The old woman was glad. "It's better than slaving in the cotton fields," she said. "I's known colored women what's wore silk dresses and lived like queens on plantations right here in Georgia. Even before the young Mrs. Norwood died, she did die, and childless. Cora was working in the big house, and after Mrs. Norwood's death, Cora came there to sleep. Now the water where the plums were felt where plums felt were cool to her hands this spring afternoon many years later, as the colonel went into the house, leaving their youngest boy dazed in front of her, and the Negro voices all around her, humming and chattering into loudness and laughter. Now we go 4. "Listen, Jair," Brother Willie said to Bert on the way from the junction to the plantation that morning. His brother arrived. "Listen, Jair, I hopes you don't expect to go around all dressed up like you is now after you gets out to the place, 'cause the colonel won't allow it. He made sis put away all them fine clothes she brought higher last year, and till she left." "Tell him to kiss my behind," Bert said. Willie bucked his eyes and stuttered and then kept quiet. His brother was the same Bert as had been as a child. Crazy. Trouble coming. William made up his mind not to be in it himself one way or another. Though he was 8 years older, he had always been afraid of Bert, with a fear worse than physical, afraid of the things that happened around Bert. From the new Ford, Bert looked out at the strangling streets of the village of the junction, at the Negroes lounging in front of stores, at the redneck crackers, at the unkept women. He heard the departing train whistle as it went deeper into Georgia, into Alabama. As they rode, he looked at the wide fields of young cotton stretching on either side, at the cabins of the sharecroppers, at the occasional house of a white owner or overseer. Then he saw the gradual rise of the Norwood plantation, the famous big house surrounded by its live oak trees and magnolias and maples, and its many acres of cotton, and he knew he was nearing home. 6 years away, kid of 14 when he left, wearing his first long trousers bought in the commissary store, feeling funny out of overalls, feeling very proud going away to school. Only the Lewis niggers, old man Norwood's kids by corps, went away to school in these parts. And with the going of Sally, the youngest, the little county school at Norwood's Crossroads closed up a bit and didn't open anymore. Sally was the colonel's last child. No other niggers needed a school. Old Aunt Toby, the grandma, before she died, used to keep on saying that the Lewis youngins ought to appreciate what the colonel was doing for them. No white man she ever heard of cared anything about educating his tar brush children. But the colonel did. Somehow, another Corps was able to put it in the colonel's mind and keep it there until the last child, Sally, got sent off to Atlanta. In Atlanta, Bert had entered the same rundown Negro boarding school, the institute that brother Willie and his oldest sister, Bertha, had attended. But Willie, several years before, hadn't stayed there long, being a dumb boy who liked the plantation better. Bertha had gone up north once with the spiritual Jubilee singers and liked it so well that she remained to work in Chicago. Now, little sister Sally, 17, went into the institute also, but had come home this spring ahead of Bert, who fooled around Atlanta a week or so before leaving, not wanting to come home really. Home, hell! Bert didn't want to come home. He felt he had no home. A brown mother and a white father. Bed for him in a nigger cabin down on the edge of the cotton fields. Soon as Cora's kids stopped nursing, they went to live outside the big house. Aunt Toby and grandmother had really raised them until she died. Then a cousin of Cora's brought up Sally. Hell of a way to live, Bert thought that night before his arrival, sitting in the Jim Crow car bound for South Georgia. During the long ride, he had turned over in his mind incidents of his childhood on the big house plantation, sitting in the smoky half coach allotted to Negroes, the other half being a baggage car. He thought of what it meant growing up as one of the Colonel Norwood's yard Negroes, a term used by field hands for the mulatto children of a white planter. It's hell, Bert thought. Not that Cora's other kids had found it hell. Only he had found it so, strangely enough. The rest of 'em are too dumb except little Sally, and she don't say nothing. But it's hell to her, too, I reckon. The boy thought to himself as the train rocked and rumbled over the road. Willie don't give a damn so long as his belly's full, and Bertha's got up north away from it all. I don't know what she really thought, but I wish it hadn't happened to me. With the self pity of bewildered youth, he began to think about himself. Always he had known the colonel was his father, from the earliest he could remember. For one thing, Bert had been lighter than any of the other colored children on the plantation, a sort of ivory white. And as a small child, his hair had been straight and brown, his eyes gray, like Norwood's. His grandma, old Aunt Toby, used to refer to them all, Willie and Bertha and Bert and Sally, not without pride, as Colonel Tom's children. They had been another brother who died. Bert noticed early in life that all the other kids in the quarters were named after their fathers, whereas he and his brothers and sisters bore their mother's name, Lewis. He was Bert Lewis, not Bert Norwood. His mother slept in the big house, but the children lived outside with Aunt Toby and Cousin Betty. Those things puzzled little Bert. As he grew up, he used to hear folks remarking on how much he looked like Colonel Tom and how little like Cora. Nearly light enough to pass for white, folks said. Spitting image of his father, too. Bert had a temper and ways like white folks, too. Indeed, you needn't act so much like quality with me, was one of his Aunt Toby's favorite ways of reprimanding him when she wanted to take him down a peg or two. He was always getting into mischief, playing pranks, and worrying his mother at the back door of the big house. There was a time once when the colonel seemed to get pleasure out of letting little Bert trail around on his heels, but that period didn't last very long for Bert, for young Bert. Sassed the colonel too, just as though he were colored, and somehow he had acquired that way of referring to Norwood as Papa. The colonel told him sternly and seriously, "Boy, don't you use that word to me." But still forgetful little devil that he was, he had come running up to the colonel that day in the stables, yelling, "Papa, dinner's ready." The slap that he received made him see stars and darkness, and Bert remembered. As though he were brushing a fly out the way, the colonel had knocked him down under the feet of the horses and went on talking to his guests. After the guests had gone, he switched Bert mercilessly. "Can't nobody teach you nothing but a switch. Know how," said old Aunt Toby afterwards. "I told you about getting familiar with that white man. But he didn't need to scar him all up like this," Bert remembered Cora saying when she saw the black and blue marks on his back. "I ain't bearing him children for him to beat him to death. You stay away from him, son, you hear? Stay away." From that time on, between Bert and the colonel, there had been a barrier of fear, a fear that held a certain mysterious fascination for Bert's sense of defiance, a fear that Bert from afar was continually taunting and baiting. For instance, the colonel had a complex, Bert recalled, that all the Negroes knew about the front door of the big house. His orders were that no Negroes go in and out of that door or cross his front porch. When the old house man, Sam, wanted to sweep off the porch, he would have to go out the back and come all the way around. It was as absurd as that, yet Bert, as a child, in the big house, visiting or helping Cora, would often dart out the front way when he thought The colonel was in town or down in the South Field, or as asleep in his library. Cora used to spank him for it, but it was a habit he kept up until he went away, a big boy, to Atlanta. Bert, homebound now, smiled to himself in the stuffy Jim Crow car and wondered if Colonel was still as tall and stern and stiff fronted as he used to be. No wonder his young white wife died years ago, having to live with him, although, according to Aunt Toby's version, the Colonel had humored her in every way. He really loved her, folks said, and had sworn after her death that he would never marry again. He hadn't. He had taken Cora. And here Bert's mind balked and veered away from speculating about the intimate life of this old man and his mother. Bert knew that, in a sense, the white man had been kind to her, remembered as a child the extra little delicacies that came down to Aunt Toby and Cousin Betty and Cora's other relatives in the quarters, especially at Christmas. He remembered how he had always known that the little colored school had not been there before Cora's children were born, and that it was no longer at the crossroads now. For the Colonel and Mr. Higgins, being political powers in the county, were in charge of education, and their policy was to not let Negroes remain unlettered. They worked better. Bert knew, too, that it was the mother's influence that had got the children sent off to the institute in Atlanta. But it was the colonel's dislike of Bert that had kept him there summer and winter until now. Not that Bert minded, summer school was fun, too, and tennis and the pleasures of the town. He was never homesick for the plantation, but he did wish sometimes that he had a home and that the colonel would treat him like a son. Tall and light and good looking as Bert was now at 20, he could have a very good time in Atlanta. Colored society had taken him up. He went around with the sons and daughters of Negro doctors and dentists and insurance brokers and professors. He had his hands full of pretty girls, lots of cream colored girls, chocolate brown girls, velvet soft nightshade girls, all like Bert. And already he had been involved in a scandal with the doctor's wife. These guys, thank you for joining and reading with us. The Ways of White Folks by Langston Hughes. We're at the bottom of 225. We're almost complete. This is the last chapter. To add to his good looks, Bert was an excellent athlete. He had been as far north as Washington and with institute teams, and had seen colored people at the Capitol riding in streetcars where there had been no Jim Crow signs, and getting on trains that had no coaches, especially for Negroes. Bert made up his mind to come north to live as soon as he finished school. He had one more year, and this last summer, Cora wanted him to spend with her because she had sensed he might never come back to the plantation again. Sally, his sister, 3 classes behind him at the institute, was frankly worried about his going home. She was afraid. Colonel Tom's getting old. He ain't nice at all like he kinda used to be. He's getting more and more touchy, Sally said to her brother, and I know he ain't gonna like the looks of you. You don't look a bit like a Georgia boy anymore. To hell with him, Bert said. I wouldn't even know you and Willie were brothers, Sally said. For Sally went home every summer, and worked in the big house with her mother and saw Willie and knew how things were on the plantation. Willie and the colonel got along fine because Willie was docile and good natured and nigger like, bowing and scraping and treating white folks like they expected to be treated. But Bert, you ain't a bit like that. Why should I be? Bert asked. I'm the old man's son, ain't I? Got white blood in me too. Yes, but what? Bert said. Let old naughty-headed Willie go on being a white folks nigger if he wants to. I won't. And that's the way it was when he came home. 5. There are people, you've probably noted it also, who have the unconscious faculty of making the world spin around themselves, throb and expand, contract and go dizzy. Then, when they are gone away, you feel sick and lonesome and meaningless. In the chemistry lab at school, did you ever hold a test tube, pouring in liquids and powders, and seeing nothing happen until a certain liquid or a certain powder is poured in, and then everything begins to smoke and fume, bubble and boil, hiss and foam, and sometimes even explode? The tube is suddenly full of an action and movement and life. Well, there are people like those certain liquids or powders. At a given moment, they can come into a room or into a town, even into a country. And the place is never the same again. Never the same again. Things bubble, boil, change. Sometimes the whole world is changed. Alexander came, Christ, Marconi, a Russian named Lenin. Not that there is any comparing Bert to Christ or Lenin, but after he returned to the big house plantation that summer, life was never the same. From Bert's very first day on that place, something was broken. Something went dizzy. The world began to spin, to ferment, and move into a new action. Not to be white folks' nigger. Bert had come home with that idea in his head. The colonel sensed it in his outstretched hand of his tall young body and had turned his back and walked into the house. Cora, with her hands in the cool water where the plums were suddenly new, in her innermost soul, a period of time had closed for her. The first night she prayed, cried in her room, and asked the Lord why she had ever let her son come home. In his cabin, Willie prayed too, humble, Lord, humble. The colonel rocked alone on his front porch, sucking a black cigar and cussing bitterly at he knew not what. The hum and laughter of the Negro voices went on as usual on the vast plantation down to the last sharecropper's cabin, but not quite the same as they had been in the morning, and never to be the same again. Is you heard about Bert? Not to be a white folks nigger? Bow down and pray in fear and trembling. Go way back in the dark afraid, or work harder and harder, or stumble and learn, or raise up your fist and strike. But once the idea comes into your head, you'll never be the same again. Old test tube of life, crucible of the South. Find the right powder and you'll never be the same again. The cotton will blaze and the cabins will burn and the chains will be broken and men of all of a sudden will shake hands, black men and white men, like steel meeting steel. The bastard, Bert said. Why couldn't he shake hands with me? I'm a Norwood too. Hush, son, said Cora, with cool water from the palms on her hands. And the hum of black voices that afternoon spread to the cabins, to the cotton fields, to the dark streets of the junction. What Bert had said. Bert, with the ivory yellow skin and the tall, proud young body. Bert come home not to be a white folks nigger. Lord child, Bert's come home. Lord child, and he said, Lord child, he said, Lord child, Lord. This is good. 6. Here we go. July passed, and August. The hot summer sun marched across the skies. The colonel ordered Bert to work in the fields. Bert had not done so. Talbot and White Foreman washed his hands of it, saying that if he had his way, the nigger would be run off the place. For the colonel, that summer was hectic enough. What with cotton prices dropping on the market, sharecroppers restless and moving, one black field hand beaten half to death by Talbot, and the storekeeper because he talked high to the neighboring white planter, news of the Scottsboro trials and the Camp Hill shootings, exciting black labor. Colonel Norwood ordered the colored rural Baptist minister to start a revival and keep it going until he said stop. Let the Negroes sing and shout their troubles away as in the past. White folks had always found revivals a useful outlet for sullen, overworked darkies. And as long as they were singing and praying, they forgot about the troubles of this world. In a frenzy of rhythms and religion, they laid their cross at the feet of Jesus. Poor, overworked Jesus. Somehow, since the war, he hadn't borne that cross so well. Too heavy. It's too heavy. Lately, Negroes seem to sense that it's not Jesus' cross anyhow. It's their own. Only old people praise King Jesus anymore. On the Norwood plantation, Bert's Dunn told the young people to stop being white folks' niggers. More and more, the colonel felt it was Bert who brought trouble into the Georgia's summer. The revival was a failure. One day, he met the boy coming back from the river where he had been swimming. The colonel lit into him with all the cuss words at his command. He told him in no uncertain language to get down to the south field to work. He told him there would be no more school at Atlanta for him, that he would show him that just because Cora happened to be his mother, he was no more than any other nigger on the place. God damn him. Bert stood silent and read in front of his father, looking as the colonel must have looked 40 years ago, except that he was a shade darker. He did not go down to the South Field to work, and all Cora's pleadings could not make him go. Yet nothing happened. That was the strange thing about it. The colonel did nothing to Bert, but he lit into Cora, nagged and scolded her for days, told her she'd better get some sense into her boy's head if she wanted any skin left on his body. So, the summer passed, Sally having worked faithfully in the house throughout the hottest months, went away to school again. Bert remained sullenly behind. The day that ends our story began like this. The sun rose burning and blazing, flooding the earth with the heat of early autumn, making even the morning oppressive. Folks get out of bed feeling like overripe fruit. The air of the morning shimmered with heat and ill humor. The night before, Colonel Norwood had been drinking. He got up trembling and shaky, yelling for Cora to bring him something clean to put on. He went downstairs cursing. The colonel did not want to eat. He drank black coffee and walked out on the tall pillared porch to get a breath of air. He was standing there looking through the trees at his cot when the Ford swept by in a cloud of dust, past the front of the house and down the highway into town. Bert was driving. The colonel cussed out loud, but his cigar turned and went into bit his cigar, turned and went into the house, slamming the door, storming to Cora, calling up the stairs where she was working. What the hell does he think he is? Driving off to town in the middle of the morning? Didn't I tell Bert not to touch that Ford, to stay down yonder in the fields and work? Yes, sir, Colonel Tom, Cora said. You sure did. Tell him I want to see him as soon as he comes back here. Send him in here and tell him I'll skin his yellow hide for him. The colonel spoke of Bert as though he were still a child. Yes, sir, Colonel Tom. Here we go. 7. The day grew hotter and hotter. Heat waves rose from the fields. Sweat dampened the colonel's body. Sweat dampened the black bodies of the Negroes in the cotton fields, too. The hard black bodies that had built the colonel's fortune out of the earth and sun and bare-handed labor. Yet the colonel, in spite of the fact that he lived on this labor, sat in his shaded house, fanning that morning and wondering what made niggers so contrary. He was thinking of Bert as the telephone rang. The fat and testy voice of his old friend, Mr. Higgins, trembled at the other end of the wire. He was calling from the junction. Accustomed as he was to his friend's voice on the phone, at first the colonel could not make out what he was saying. When he did understand, his neck bulged and the palm of his hands that held the phone were wet with sweat. Anger and shame made his tall body stoop and bend like an animal about to spring. Mr. Higgins was talking about Bert. That yellow nigger, Mr. Higgins said. One of your yard niggers sassed. Mr. Higgins said. I thought I'd better tell you, Mr. Higgins said. Everybody, Mr. Higgins said. The whole town was excited about Bert. In the heat of this overwarm autumn day, the hotheads of the white citizens of the town had suddenly become inflamed about Bert. Mr. Higgins, county politician and postmaster at the junction, was well qualified to know. His office had been the center of the news. It seemed that Bert had insulted the young white woman who sold stamps and made out money orders at the post office, and Mr. Higgins was telling the colonel about it on the phone, warning him to get rid of Bert, that people around the junction were getting sick and tired of seeing him. At the post office, this is what happened: a simple argument over change. But the young woman who sold the stamps was not used to arguing with Negroes or being corrected by them when she made a mistake. Bert said, "I gave you $1," holding out the incorrect change. "You gave me back only 64 cents. The young woman said, counting the change, "Yes, but you have 8 3-cent stamps. Move on now. There's others waiting." Several white people were in line. Bert said, "Yes, but 8 times 3 is not 36. You owe me 12 cents more." The girl looked at the change and realized she was wrong. She looked at Bert, light, near white nigger with gray blue eyes. "You gotta be harder on those kind than you have to be on the black ones. An educated nigger, too. Besides, it was hot and she wasn't feeling well. A light, near white nigger with gray eyes. Instead of correcting the change, she screamed and let out her head fall toward in front of the window. Two or three white men waiting to buy stamps seized Bert and attempted to throw him out of the post office. Bert remembered he'd been a football player and Colonel Norwood's son, so he fought back. One of the white men got a bloody mouth. Woman screamed. Bert walked out of the post office, got in the Ford, and drove away. By that time, the girl who sold the stamps had recovered. She was telling everyone how Bert had insulted her. "Oh my God, it was terrible," she said. "That's one nigger don't know his place, Tom," Mr. Higgins roared over the phone. "And it's your fault he don't be sending them to school to be educated." The colonel listened to his friend at the other end of the wire. "Why, that yellow buck comes to my store, and if he ain't waited on quick as white folks are, he walks out. He said last week, standing out on my corner, he wasn't all nigger nohow. Said his name was Norwood, not Lewis, like the rest of Cora's family. Said your plantation would be his when you pass out. And all that kind of stuff. Boastings to the niggers listening about you being his father." The colonel almost dropped the phone. Now, Tom, you know that stuff don't go round here, these parts. Georgia, ruinous to other niggers hearing that sort of talk, too. There ain't been no race trouble in our country for 3 years since the Deacon's lynching. But I'm telling you, Norwood folks ain't gonna stand for this. I'm speaking on the quiet, but I see ahead. What happened this morning in the post office ain't none too good. When I get through with him," said the colonel hoarsely, library, yelled for Sam, shouted for Cora, ordered whiskey, drank, and screamed. God damn that son of yours. I'm going to kill him, he said to Cora. Get out of here, he shouted as Sam, who came back with the cigars. Cora wept. The colonel raved. A car shot down the road. The colonel rushed out, brandishing a cane to stop it. It was Bert. He paid no attention to the old man standing on the steps of the pillared porch waving his stick. Ashen with fury, the colonel came back into the house and fumbled with his keys at an old chest. Finally, a drawer opened and he took out a pistol. He went toward the door as Cora began to howl, but on the porch he became suddenly strengthless, limp. Shaking, the old man sank into the chair, holding the gun. He would not speak to Cora. Late, now we're in 8, guys. Page 236. Late in the afternoon, Colonel Norwood sent Cora for their son. The gun had been put away. At least Cora did not see it. I want to talk to that boy, the colonel said. Fetch him here. Damn young fool, bastard of a nigger. What's he gonna do to my boy? Cora thought. Son, be careful, as she went across the yard and down toward Willie's cabin to find Bert. Son, you be careful. I didn't bear you for no white man to kill you. Son, you be careful. You ain't white. Don't you know that? You be careful. Oh, Lord God, Jesus in heaven. Son, be careful. Cora was crying when she reached Willie's door, crying all the way back to the big house with her son. To hell with that old man, Bert said. He ain't no trouble, old as he is. What can he do to me? Lord have mercy, son. Is you crazy? Why don't you be like that, Willie? Why don't you be like Willie? He ain't never had no fuses with the colonel. White folks, nigger. White folks, nigger, Bert said. Why don't you talk sense? Why don't you talk sense, Cora begged. Why hadn't he kept his promise then and let me go back to school in Atlanta like my sister? You said if I came home this summer, he'd let me go back to the institute, didn't you? Then why didn't he do it? Why didn't you act right, son? Oh, Cora moaned. You can't get nothing from white folks if you don't act right. Act like Willie? You mean? And the rest of these cotton pickers? Then I don't want anything. They had reached the back door now. It was nearly dark in the kitchen where Livonia was making biscuits. Don't rile him, Bert, child, Cora said as she took him through the house. I don't know what he might do to you. He's got a gun. Don't worry about me, Bert answered. The setting sun made long paths of golden light across the parlor floor through the tall windows opening on the west. The air was thick and sultry with autumn heat. The colonel sat, bent and old, near a table where there were whiskey and cigars and a half-opened drawer. When Bert entered, he suddenly straightened up, and the old commanding look came into his eyes. He told Cora to go upstairs to her room. Of course, he never asked Bert to sit down. The tall mulatto boy stood before his father, the colonel. The old white man felt the steel of him standing there, like the steel of himself 40 years ago. Still of the Norwoods, darkened now by Africa. The old man got up, straight and tall, too, and suddenly shook his fist in the face of the boy. "You listen to me," he said, trembling with quiet. "I don't want to have to whip you again like I did when you were a child." He was almost hissing. "The next time I might kill you. I've been running this plantation 35 years and never had to beat a nigger old as you are. Never had a trouble out of none of Core's children before either. About you, but you." The old man sat down. "I don't have trouble with my colored folks. They do what I say, or what Talbot says, and that's all there is to it. If they turn in crops, they get a living. If they work for wages, they get paid. If they spend their money on liquor or old cars or fixing up their cabins, they can do what they choose, long as they know their places and don't hinder their work. To Cora's young ones, you hear me, boy? I gave all the chances any nigga ever had in these parts, more than many a white child's had too. I sent you off to school. I gave your brother, Willie, that house he's living in. When he got married, pay him for his work, help him out if he needs it. None of my darkies suffer. You went off to school. Could have kept on. Would have sent you back this fall, but I don't intend to pay for no nigger or white boy either if I had one that acts the way you been acting." Colonel Norwood got up again, angrily, "and certainly not for no black fool. I'm talking to you like this only because you're Cora's child. But you know damn well it's my habit to tell people what to do, not discuss it with them. I just want to know what's the matter with you, though, whether you're crazy or not. And if you're not, you better change your ways a damn sight, or it won't be safe for you here, and you know it. Venting your impudence on white women, ruining my niggas, driving like mad through the junction, carrying on as you please. I'm warning you, boy. God damn it. Now I want you to answer me and talk right." The old man sat down in his chair again by the whiskey bottle and partly open drawer. He took a drink. "What do you mean talk right?" Bert said. "I mean talk like a nigger should to a white man," the colonel snapped. "Oh, but I'm not a nigger, Colonel Norwood," Bert said. "I'm your son." The old man frowned at the boy in the front of him. "Cora's son," he said. "Fatherless?" Bert asked. "Fatherless?" "Bastard," the old man said. Bert's hands closed fists, so the colonel opened the drawer. Bert's hands closed into a fist, so the colonel opened his drawer. Where the pistol was, he took it out and laid it on the table. "You black bastard," he said. "I've heard that before." Bert just stood there. "You're talking about my mother." "Well," the colonel answered, his fingers playing over the surface of the gun. "What can you do about it?" The boy felt his whole body suddenly tighten and pull. The muscles from his forearms rippled. "Niggas like you are hung to trees," the old man went on. "I'm not a nigger," said Bert. "Ain't you my father? And a hell of a father you are, too, holding a gun on me. I'll break your black neck for you, the colonel shouted. Don't talk to me like that. He jumped up. You'll break my neck. The boy stood his ground as his father came toward him. Get out of here. The colonel shook with rage. Get out, or I'll do more than that if I ever lay eyes on you again. The old man picked up the pistol from the table, yet the boy did not move. I'll fill you full of bullets if you come back here. Get off this place. Get to the hell out of this county. Now, tonight, go on. Go on, the colonel mentioned with his pistol toward the door that led to the kitchen and the back of the house. Not that way, Bert said. I'm not your servant. You must think I'm scared. Well, you can't drive me out the back way like a dog. You're not going to run me off like a field hand you can't use anymore. I'll go, the boy said, starting toward the front door, but not out the back from my own father's house. You nigger bastard, Norwood screamed, springing between his son and the door, but the boy kept calmly on. The steel of the gun was between them, but that didn't matter. Rather, it seemed to pull them together like a magnet. Don't you, Norwood began, for suddenly Bert's hands grasped the colonel's arm. Dare put your... And his old bones began to crack. Black hands on. Why don't you shoot? Bert interrupted him, slowly turning his wrist. Me. Why don't you shoot then? The old man twisted and bent in fury and pain, but the gun fell to the floor. Why don't you shoot? Bert said again as his hand sought his father's throat. With furious sureness, they took the old white man's neck in their strong fingers. Why don't you shoot then, Papa? Colonel Norwood clawed the air, breathing hoarsely and loud. His tongue growing stiff and dry, his eyes beginning to burn. Shoot! Why don't you then, huh? Why? The chemicals of their two lives exploded. Everything was very black around them. The white man's hand stopped clawing the air. His heart stood still. His blood no longer flowed. He wasn't breathing. Why don't you shoot? Bert said, but there was no answer. When the boy's eyes cleared, he saw his mother standing at the foot of the stairs, so he let the body drop. It fell with a thud, old and white, in a path of red from the setting sun. Why didn't he shoot, Mama? He didn't want me to live. He was white. Why didn't he shoot then? Tom! Tom! Cried Cora, falling across his body. Colonel Tom. Colonel Tom! Tom! He's dead, Bert said. I'm leaving, though. Tom! Cora screamed, pulling at the dead man. Colonel Tom! Bert bent down and picked up the pistol. This is what my father wanted to use on me, he said. He's dead. But I can use it on all the white men in Georgia. They'll be coming to get me now. They never wanted me before. but I know they'll want me now. He stuffed the pistol in his shirt. Cora saw what her son had did. Run, she said, rising and going to him. Run, child, out the front way quick, so they won't see you in the kitchen. Make for the swamp, honey. Cross the fields for the swamp. Go the creek way. In the running water, dogs can't smell no tracks. Hurry, son. Yes, Mama, Bert said so slowly. But if I see they gonna get me before I reach the swamp, then I'm coming back here. Let them take me out of my father's house if they can. He patted the gun in his side, inside his shirt, and smiled. They'll never string me up to some roadside tree for the crackers to laugh at. Not me. Hurry, child. Cora opened the door, and the sunset streamed in like a river of blood. Hurry, child. Bert went out across the wide pillared porch and down the road. He saw Talbot and the storekeeper coming, so he turned off through the streets. And then, because he wanted to live, he began to run. The whole sky was a blaze of color as he ran. Then it began to get dark, and the glow went away. In the house, Cora started to talk to the dead man on the floor, just as though he were not dead. She pushed and pulled at the body, trying to get him to get up himself. Then she heard the footsteps of Talbot and the storekeeper at the porch. She rose and stood as if petrified in the middle of the floor. A knock, and two men were peering through the screen door into the dusk dark room. Then Talbot opened the door. Hello, Cora, he said. What's the matter with you? Why didn't you let us in? Where's that damn fool of boy you going? Coming out the front way like he owned the place. What's the matter with you, woman? Can't you talk? Where's Colonel Norwood? Let's have some light in here, said the storekeeper, turning a button beside the door. Great God! Talbot cried. Jim, look at this! The colonel's body laid huddled on the floor, old purple and white at Cora's feet. Why, he's blue in the face, the storekeeper said, bending over the body. Oh, get that nigger we saw walking out the door. Get that nigger bastard, Cora's. Get that nigger. Why, the colonel's dead. Talbot rushed toward the door. That nigger, he cried. He must be running toward the swamps now. We'll get him. Telephone town. Jim, they're in the library. Telephone the sheriff. Telephone the Bill family down by the swamp. Get men, white men, after that nigger. The storekeeper ran into the library and began to call on the phone. Talbot looked at Cora standing in the center of the room. Where's Norwood's car? In the barn? Talk, you black wench, talk. But Cora didn't say a word. She watched the two white men rush out the house into the yard. In a few minutes, she heard the roar of a motor hurtling down the road. It was dark outside. Night had come. Cora turned toward the body on the floor. My boy, she said. He can't get to the swamp now. They telephoned the white folks down that way to head him off. He'll come back home. She called aloud, Colonel Tom, why don't you get up from there and help me? You know they're after our boy. You know they got him out there running from the white folks in the night, running from the hounds and the guns and the ropes and all what they uses to kill poor Negroes with. My boy's out there running. Why don't you help him? Cora bent over the body. Colonel Tom, you hear me? You said he was my boy. My bastard boy, I heard you, but he's yourn too. Out yonder in the dark running from your people. Why don't you get up and stop him? You know you could. Use a power in Polk County. Use a big man, and yet our son's out there running from the po white trash. What you ain't worth done the little finger of nobody's got your blood in 'em. Time. Cora shook the dead body fiercely. Get up from there and stop him, Colonel Tom. But the white man did not move. Gradually, Cora stopped shaking him. Then she rose and backed away from this man she had known so long. You's cruel, Tom, she whispered. I might have knowed it. You'd be like that, sending my boy out to die. I might have knowed it ever since you beat him in that time under the feet of the horses. Well, you won't mistreat him no more now. That's finished. She went toward the steps. I'm going to make a place for him. Upstairs, under my bed. He's my child. I'll look out for him. And don't you come in my bedroom while he's up there. Don't you come in my bed either. No more at all. I calls you for help me now, Tom, and you just lays there. I calls you to get up now, and you don't move. Whenever you called me in the night, I woke up. Whenever you wanted me to love you, I reached out my arms to you. I bore you 5 children, and now her voice rose hysterically. One of 'em's out yonder running from your people. Our youngest boy's out yonder in the dark running. I suspects you out there too, with the rest of the white folks. Mm-hmm. Bert's running from you too. You said he weren't your poor little boy, yellow bastard, but he's yourn, Colonel Tom, and he's running from you. Yes, out yonder in the dark, you running our child with a gun in your hand, and Talbot following behind you with a rope to hang Bert with. She leaned against the wall near the staircase, sobbing violently. Then she went back toward the man on the floor. Her sobs gradually ceased as she looked down at his crumpled body. Then she said slowly, Listen, I've been sleeping with you too long not to know this ain't you. Tom laying down there with your eyes shut on the floor. You can't fool me. You ain't never been so still like this before. You's out yonder running my boy. Colonel Thomas Norwood, running my boy through the fields in the dark, running my poor little helpless Bert through the fields in the dark for to lynch him and to kill him. God damn you, Tom Norwood, Cora cried. God damn you. She went upstairs. For a long time the body lay alone on the floor in the parlor. Later, Cora heard Sam and Livonia weeping and shouting in the kitchen, the Negro voices outside in the dark, and the feet going down the road. She thought she heard the baying of hounds afar off, too, as she prepared a hiding place for Bert in the attic. Then she came down to her room, put the most beautiful quilt she had on her bed. Maybe he'll just want to rest here first, she thought. Maybe he'll be awfully tired and just want to rest. This is so good. We are at the climax, guys. The ways of white folks. Last chapter. We are finishing up. Here we go. Page 248 at the top. Then she heard a loud knock at the door and white voices talking, and Sam's frightened answers. The doctor and the undertakers had come to take the body away. In a little while, she heard them lifting it up and putting it in the dead wagon. And all the time they kept talking. I'll be having his funeral in town. Ain't nothing but niggers left out here. Didn't have no relatives, did he, Sam? Too bad. Nobody to look after his stuff tonight. Every white man's able to walk around with the posse. That young nigger swing before midnight. What a necktie party, say Sam. Yes, sir, yes, sir. That black housekeeper, Cora, murdering bastard's mother? She's upstairs, I reckon, sir. Like to see how she looks. Get her down here. Yes, sir. Sam's teeth were chattering. And how about a little drink before we start back to town? Yes, sir. Cora's got the keys for the liquor, sir. Well, get her down. Double quick then. Yes, sir. Cora heard Sam coming up for her. Downstairs, the voices went on. Woof, woof, this is so good, right, guys? What? We've been reading for over an hour. Highest heart, love, and honor. We doing it. Downstairs, the voices went on. They were talking about her. Lived together. Ain't been a white woman here overnight since the wife died when I was a kid. Bad business, though, living with a drawing cracker tones nigger. As Cora came down the steps, the undertakers looked at her half grinning. So you're the black wench that's got these educated darky children. Well, I guess you'll see one of them swinging full old bullet holes before you get up in the morning. Or maybe they'll burn him. How'd you like a roasted darky for breakfast, girlie? Cora stood quite quiet, still on the stairs. Is that all you wanted to say to me? She asked. Now don't get smart, the doctor said. Maybe you think there's nobody to boss you now. We're going to have a little drink before we go. Get out a bottle. I take my orders from the Colonel Norwood, sir, Cora said. Well, you'll take no more orders from him, the undertaker declared. He's outside in the dead wagon. Get along now and get out a bottle. He's out yonder with the mob, Cora said. I tell you, he's in my wagon, dead as a doornail. I tell you, he's running with the mob, Cora said. I believe this black woman's gone nuts, the doctor cried. Sam, you get the liquor. Yes, sir, Sam sputtered with fright. Cora, give me. But Cora didn't move. Ah, loud. Lord have mercy, Sam cried. To hell with the liquor, Charlie, the undertaker said nervously. Let's start back to town. We want to get in on some of that excitement too. They should have found that nigga by now, and I want to see him drag him. I want to see him drag him out there. All right, Jim, the others agreed. Then to Cora, but don't you darkies go to bed until you see the bonfire. You all are getting beside yourselves around Polk County. We'll burn a few more of you if you don't watch out. The man left, and the wheels of the wagon turned on the drive. Sam began to cry. Have mercy! Lord Jesus, have mercy! Cora, is you a fool? Is you? Then why didn't you give him the demons the liquor? Riled as these white folks is, in my old age, is I gonna be burnt by these crackers? Lord, is I sinned? Lord, what has I done? He looked at Cora. I sure ain't gonna stay here tonight. I's gone. Go on, she said. The colonel can't get his own drinks when he comes back. Lord God Jesus. Sam, his eyes bucking from their sockets, bolted from the room fast as his old legs could carry him. Cora heard him running blindly through the house, moaning. She went to the kitchen where the pots were still boiling on the stove, but Livonia had fled. The biscuits burnt in the oven. She looked out the back door, but no lights were visible anywhere. The cabins were quiet. I reckon they all gone, she said to herself. Even my boy Willie. I reckon he's gone too. You see, Colonel Tom, everybody's scared of you. They know you done gone with the mob again, like you did that time they hung Luke Jordan, and you went and helped him. Now you's out chasing my boy too. I hears you hollering, and sure enough, all around the big house in the dark, in a wide, far-off circle, men and dog cries and auto horns sounded in the night. Nearer they came, even as Cora stood at the back door, listening. She closed the door, bolted it, put out the light, and went back into the parlor. He'll come in by the front, she said, back from the swamp way. He won't let him stop him from getting home to me again just once. Po little boy. He ain't got no place to go now. Poor little boy. What growed up with such pride in his heart, just like you, Colonel Tom. Spitting image of you. Proud and got no place to go. Nearer and nearer the manhunt came. The cries and the horns and the dogs. Headlights began to flash in the dark down the road. Off through the trees, Cora heard men screaming, and suddenly, feet running, nearer, nearer. She knew it was him. She knew they had seen him. She knew they had seen him too. Then there were voices shouting very near the house. Don't shoot, men! We want to get him alive! Close in on him! He must be in them bushes there by the porch. Look! And suddenly, shots rang out. The door opened. Cora saw flashes of fire spitting into the blackness, and Bert's tall body in the doorway. He was shooting at the voices outside in the dark. The door closed. Hello, Ma, he said. One or two of them won't follow me no further. Cora locked the door as bullets splintered through the wood, shattered the window panes. Then a great volley of shots struck the house. Blinding headlights focused on the porch. Shouts and cries of, Nigger! Nigger! Get the nigger! Filled the night. I was waiting for you, honey, Cora said. Quick, your hiding place is ready for you, upstairs in the attic. I sawed out a place under the floor. Maybe they won't find you, child. Hurry, before your father comes. No time to hide, Ma, Bert panted. No time to hide, Ma. They're at the door now. They'll be coming in the back way, too. They'll be coming in the windows. They'll be coming in everywhere. I got one bullet left. Ma, it's mine. Yes, son, it's yours. Go upstairs in Mama's room and lay down on my bed and rest. I won't let them up until you're gone. God bless you, child. That's so deep. So deep. Woo! Wow. Woo! We're in the last couple pages. Thank you for reading with me The Ways of White Folks, Last chapter, last pages. This is so deep. So now he got back to the house. The manhunt is finding him. And he was told by his mom to go upstairs. And he has one bullet left. Quickly they embraced. A moment his head rested on her shoulders. I'm awfully tired running, Ma. I couldn't get to the swamp. Seems like they've been chasing me for hours, crawling through the cotton a long time. I gotta rest now. Cora pushed him toward the stairs. Go on, son, she said gently. At the top, Bert turned and looked back at this little brown woman standing there waiting for the mob. Outside, the noise was terrific. Men shouted and screamed, massing for action. All at once, they seemed to rush in, a great wave for the house. They broke the doors and windows in and poured into the room, a savage crowd of white men, red and wild-eyed, with guns and knives, sticks and ropes, lanterns and flashlights. They paused at the foot of the stairs where Cora stood looking down at them silently. Keep still, men, one of the leaders said. He's armed. Say, where's that yellow bastard of yours, Cora? Upstairs? Yes, Cora said. Wait. Wait. Hell. Wait, hell, the man cried. Come on, boys, let's go. A shot rang out upstairs. Then Cora knew it was all right. Go on, she said, stepping aside for the mob. The next morning, when the people saw her bloody and unrecognizable body hanging in the public square at the junction, some said with a certain pleasure, that's what we do to niggers. Down here, that's what we do to niggers. Not realizing Bert had been taken dead, and that all the fun for the mob had been sort of stale at the end. But others, aware of what had happened, thought it'd be a hell of a lot better lynching a live nigger. Say, ain't there nobody else mixed up in this here Norwood murder? Where's that boy's brother? Willie. Hey. So the evening papers carried this item in the late editions. Double lynching in Georgia. A large mob late this afternoon wreaked vengeance on the second of two Negro-filled hands. The murderers of Colonel Thomas Norwood, wealthy planter, found dead at Big House Plantation. Bert Lewis was lynched last night, and his brother Willie Lewis today. The sheriff of the county is unable to identify any members of the mob. Colonel Norwood's funeral has not yet been held. The dead man left no heirs. And that's the conclusion of the ways of white folks. Ha ha! Completed. Langston Hughes is a genius. Father and Son is completed. All the chapters are completed from 1 through 14. I thank you all for reading with me. Highest heart, love, and honor. It's time to hit the chimes. I love y'all so much. We did it. We read another book. Thank you all for your donations during this time. Highest heart, love, and honor. I will be leaving for Alaska soon. So, I'm wondering which next book we're going to read. We got some great choices. And so, with all love and honor, we will be back another day. I want y'all to have a wonderful, wonderful week and month, and I will talk to you soon. Highest heart, love. I'm going to ring the chimes. You sit here with the ancestors. Peace, peace. Peace.